People, performance, and profits. You know, if you're a business leader, if you're a CEO, small business owner, those are the things that are important to you, and those are the things that are important to me. And that's why we created the P3 video series. In the last session, I introduced this topic of the motivation myth. And anybody who's led anybody for a period of time knows that you can motivate for a period of time and get some performance out of people. And then you have to keep motivating, and you have to keep motivating. On the flip side of that was this idea of inspiration. It's about digging deeper into that individual to understand what drives them in the first place and to move from temporary performance to sustainable performance. You know, one of the things that we talked about, and the reality is, everybody is motivated by something. So it's not about, hey, Susie Q or Johnny Q is not motivated. It's about changing their motivation. But at the end of that last video, I introduced this concept of purpose. And for those of you that have heard the term before, it kind of sounds like something not very practical. I mean, let's think about it. We live in a world where we measure everything. We have goals, we have objectives, we have KPIs, all of which I even use in my business. But we forget to ask the question, what's the purpose of what we're doing as an organization? Let's flip the conversation, because in the last session, I got a ton of comments around, help me understand the value, the practical value of purpose. So in this week's segment, we're going to take a look at 4 specific things regarding the value of purpose. First of all, what is the value of purpose? Secondly, how practical is purpose in your business and ultimately in my business? And then look at the direction that purpose provides. And then I'll give you a couple of questions to ask yourself, some practical application to show to you that purpose is in fact practical. Point number 1 in our conversation is around why purpose matters in the first place. We know it does, but let's figure out why it really matters. Like, you and I both spend 5, 6, 7 days a week going to work. We get up at 5 or 6 in the morning, we get in our cars, we drive to work, and we spend the next 8 or 10 hours with people that are not our family. We spend more time with the away team than we do with the home team. In essence, organizations are a group of people that generally have some like desires. They're kind of heading in the same direction. You know, Simon Sinek calls this the new tribe. And in fact, companies are a group of members that make up a tribe. Tribes are all about a sense of belonging. We know through psychology, through tests, through all kinds of other things, that people, you and I, all have this innate sense of belonging to something. Whether it's a tribe, whether it's a company, whether it's a group, whether it's some type of larger initiative that affects people, we know that makes sense. The practical nature of purpose is that it draws people in. So in fact, purpose does matter. In fact, when people have this sense of belonging to something, they end up deciding on whether or not to sacrifice more in order to support that particular initiative, company, whatever it is that they have. There's this quote that I love. There is a cost for the money that we make, and sometimes the cost is not worth it. Let me repeat that and think about the people on your team. There is a cost for the money that they make, and sometimes the cost is not worth it. In fact, they'll sacrifice, your team, your company will sacrifice more if they feel the cost is worth it. How do they understand or determine if that cost is actually worth it? It depends on the purpose and if you draw them in to the tribe you actually have. You know, people will work for money, but they perform for purpose. Now think about what I just said. You and I will work for money. We have worked for money. My first job, there was no purpose to the company except to make money. My motivation was to make money. We've all been there. But long term, People continue to work for money. And if you're trying to go from people to performance and create profits, it's not about just the money people make. It's something that goes beyond that. Now, imagine this, and I mentioned this story in the last video. Imagine you're one of the Wright brothers, and you're sitting in the bicycle shop, and all of a sudden this epiphany comes to you, and it's, think of the impact that we can have if we could fly from point A to point B like the birds do, as opposed to getting on my bicycle and riding from point A to point B, or in a car and it's going off all these roads because we can't fly the way the crow flies. Their purpose was on creating a means of travel to allow people to connect faster. It was all about this idea of connection, where a number of miles down the road, you got Samuel Pierpont Langley, who had all the money he knew what to do with because he was funded by the War Department. He had PhDs, he had resources beyond belief. But here in the Wright brothers bicycle shop, they assembled a team based on a purpose, and the purpose was to connect people. Well, you know the rest of the story. I talked about it in the last video, and I'm sure you learned it as you were coming up through school. Did the Wright brothers invent flight, or did Samuel Pierpont Langley invent flight? Most people don't even know who Langley is, right? That is the difference. Purpose matters because it ultimately draws people in. There's a practical application of it. Now let's talk about this a little bit, because last time when I used the term purpose, a lot of the comments I got back from business leaders, friends of mine and so forth is, hey, Steve, stop with the altruistic stuff. You know, I got a business to run. Well, I got a business to run too. So let's understand this fact that purpose is not altruistic. What happens is we confuse purpose with things that are not exactly purpose. For example, there's a big initiative right now, and it has been for the last decade, around corporate social responsibility. Now, let's think about the difference between the two here. Purpose is about what I provide to a client, what I provide internally, and why I actually do that. Corporate social responsibility has nothing to do with it. CSR in and of itself is not bad. But when we overlay the two and assume those two are the same, we actually get it wrong. Now look, I know of organizations that have all kinds of money being spent on corporate social responsibility programs. I don't care if it's a green initiative or some other environmental initiative or really anything else. And they're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars. And it makes some people feel good that they're able to do that. But when you look inside the organization and you uncover the fact that they're not actually operating under a purpose, their people are leaving. Turnover is ridiculous as a result of that. They can't hire people. Their profits are going down in what's one of the best economies you could possibly think of. And in essence, the organization is failing because there really isn't a long-term purpose, even though they're doing all these great things over here with corporate social responsibility. We have to understand those two are different. On the flip side, I know of a number of organizations, and you know of this too, and it might even be your organization, that you've got your purpose of why you do what you do beyond financial gain. Everybody in your organization knows it and understands it, and you're doing phenomenally well, yet you do nothing in terms of corporate social responsibility. Now, I'm not advocating not doing anything there, but we have to understand that there's a big difference between the two. When I talk about purpose, when we talk about purpose, when you embrace purpose and the importance of it, it's about what you do and the service that you provide and why you do it beyond making money. It's not about all these other altruistic things. There is nothing wrong with the altruistic things, but let's not confuse these two items because it really gives purpose a bad rep, which is what I did in the last video. I didn't explain it enough, and I was called out as a result of it to help explain what this means to the typical business leader, the typical CEO, and that's what we're trying to do here, right? What we've got to understand is that there's this practical nature. Purpose, in and of itself, attracts people. You know, we talked about tribes in the first section of this. Now let me explain that. Think about it from the perspective of recruiting, right? Everybody's recruiting. Everybody's trying to draw in talent these days. I mean, that is the business that I happen to be in. If you're a leader, you probably have open positions on your team, not because you're a bad leader, but because we're in economic conditions and there's just not enough people. There's a 4 million delta between the people that are available and the positions that are open. Now let's think about this. If you or I are a candidate, and all things being equal, we have two organizations that come to us that are similar in size and in profitability and scope. And let's say we're selling, and we're going to be selling similar type products. One's really not much better than the other. The geographic territory is the same. The teams are about the same size. The dollars might even be similar. They could be a little bit off. Which company are most people choosing? Well, what we know and what the data shows us is that those individuals will gravitate towards the organization that has a purpose beyond just making money, that ties, that hits some type of nerve within them. So there is a practical application of purpose and talking about your purpose, not just knowing it and hiding it in terms of recruiting people, because people like tribes. We like to be connected and feel connected to the organization and what they're all about. The second piece to this is it's very practical, that purpose drives performance. I already talked about that once. In the last video, I talked about the difference between motivation and inspiration. You can motivate people to perform. They will work for money. We've already established that. But when there is a specific purpose involved, that creates a different level of purpose or of performance that you cannot force. It cannot happen, and it's sustainable. So there's a practical application in driving performance when the decisions you make are based on purpose. The other thing about purpose is it provides direction. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But in essence, it becomes your litmus test in the way in which you make decisions or avoid certain types of decisions, which we'll get into, based upon does it meet the purpose that you've set out, or does it not meet the purpose that you've set out? And the last one is, we talk about this term in HR circles, which is somewhat overused, but we talk about this idea of engagement, right? So let's think about what engagement looks like. Engagement means people that show up for work, that are happy, that are okay with the tribe, the away tribe or the away team, as opposed to just being at home with the home team all the time, right? It's the difference between getting the most out of somebody and getting the best out of somebody. Think about that for a second. Do you want to squeeze the most out of your teams, or do you want to get the best out of your teams because they actually want to give it to you? Think about the dynamic difference. There is a practical application to all things we do in this idea of purpose. Now let's hit this third component of this third key, and it's this idea of purpose provides direction. Now, imagine this is your dorm room and you're Mark Zuckerberg. You know the name. I don't have to tell you the company that he founded, right? And we're sitting in this room and all of a sudden this epiphany comes up that we need a better way to connect with other people on campuses. Now, maybe the ulterior motive is, I want to meet more girls. I mean, maybe that's what was in his head. But his purpose initially was not, in fact, to create this behemoth that makes gazillions of dollars a year. That came later, a great idea. But his purpose was, again, about connecting people. Now, maybe it was somewhat self-centered that he wanted to meet girls. Again, it doesn't matter. But purpose provides the direction in which we make our decisions against. His purpose was connecting with other people, created a product, made his decisions based on that. And look where it's taken him to this point. What we know when you study this is that companies that have a clear purpose, they may get to their end goal a little bit slower, but they tend to be more confident in the way in which they get there so they can weather the storm. Let's think about the companies that closed the doors in 2008 and 2009. I use this analogy a little bit in the last video so you understand this directional piece, but also understand that purpose is the glue that holds your entire organization together. So let's think about a four-legged stool. On one of those legs, we have people. Once we have those people, we provide them with processes to help them. One of those legs is process. The third leg is performance, and the fourth leg is profits. Now, those can stand alone without a top, but if the wind comes down and the economy stinks, ultimately one of those legs are going to fall over. The thing that provides direction, the decisions we make for people, for the processes that we employ, for the performance we get out of our people, and ultimately the profits of our organization, the top to that stool that provides that direction is the idea of purpose. Without purpose, one or more of those legs ultimately falls over. We've got to understand that this is what allows us to make our decisions. If we have a litmus test when we're making decisions within our organization, let me give you an example of what happens on the flip side. Imagine you're Bernie Madoff. Now, nobody likes to hear that name because that's what happens. Everybody talks about Bernie's purpose of bilking everybody for millions of dollars. I disagree with that. That didn't provide him the direction to do what he did. What happened is Bernie did not have a specific purpose. Bernie was motivated by greed and ultimately had to keep feeding that motivation and feeding that motivation. If Bernie and his organization, the Madoff companies, had a clear purpose of where they were going, they would have avoided the decisions that ultimately took them to stealing millions and millions of dollars from people, ruining people's lives. Now, that's an extreme example. But think about the decisions you make within your organization. Are you making decisions about who to hire and who to fire based solely off of financial performance, or about your ability to achieve a specific purpose that, when done correctly, drives financial performance? Now, there's extreme conditions to everything, but we have to understand the way we utilize purpose helps us make the right decisions and helps us avoid the wrong decisions when leading our people, when leading our businesses. So purpose provides direction. Now let's look at the practical application of this whole thing, right? So we've got purpose matters, we've got purpose is practical, and we've got purpose provides direction. Now, how does that play out? I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. If you're a leader, if you're managing a couple of people, if you're CEO of a business. Question number 1, why do we choose, or why do you choose to exist together in your organization beyond just financial gain? Can you actually answer that question? If you can't, I think it's time to take a step back and figure out why you do what you do beyond just financial gain. Question number 2, what would be lost if your company, if my company ceased to exist? And kind of the follow-up question to that, it's 2A, let's call it, would anyone care? Let me rephrase that. Would anyone care? Would your customers care if you went away? Or is it just easy enough to replace you because you just provide another blah service or another blah product because there's no purpose behind what you're actually doing? That's a key question. I asked these 2 questions of a CEO yesterday. Could not answer either one of them with clarity. I got an answer, and after about a 3.5-minute tirade of we do all these great things, I asked the question again. Now, this is a CEO of an organization that has about 17,000 employees. We are not talking about a small organization. This is not contained to entrepreneurial organizations. This is organizations of all sizes. And we had to kind of rethink that. He had to think about, what are we really doing beyond making money? Because ultimately it will drive their ability to make money. He had a complete different view. And then question number 3, why are we important to the people that we serve? If you could ask those 3 questions and answer them with a common answer, you probably have an idea of what your true purpose beyond profits really is. Purpose that ultimately drives profits because of the practical connection. Now, that's number 1, is ask it. Ask the question. Number 2 is actually what I call test it. Does the purpose that you come up with for your organization affect your internal team as well as your external team, the home and the away team? If it only affects one, if it only drives value to one, I'm going to encourage you to go back to the drawing board, and because that's probably not your purpose. That should be the litmus test. Is your purpose real? Is your purpose effective? Is your purpose something that people can get behind, that will drive them to perform, so you don't have to worry about all this excess motivation? So number one, ask those 3 questions. Number 2, let's test it. Let's determine, does it work internally and externally? I'll give you an example of this. Some notes that I wrote down around my business. So I'm in the talent business. Think about it in terms of recruiting optimization. Again, people, performance, profits. Have the right people, drive the right performance, and ultimately profits. Why are we in business? Well, if you asked me previously, it'd be we love matching really great people with really great organizations. And the question is, why? Well, it's simple, because people need good, stable jobs, and companies need good, stable people in order to continue to offer more good, stable jobs. Okay, why is that important? Well, if people can't find jobs, they can't take care of their families. If companies can't find the right people, they ultimately have to shut their doors, which means less people can take care of their families. It continues to cause this big issue. So people living their purpose is our purpose as an organization. It's the basis in which I make all decisions. Does this affect our ability or our client's ability to have the right person who's driving the right performance and living their purpose? Are we doing that for our employees internally? Continue to ask yourself the why question until it starts to impact, a true impact to the people outside of the organization that you already serve and the people inside your organization. And ultimately, the last piece is measure it. Once you know exactly what the purpose of your organization is, you can begin to create KPIs that matter to see, are people in my business actually living their purpose? Are we putting the right people with the right client? Are we hiring the right people ourselves? Are we assigning the right people to the right client so that they can live out their purpose and it affects both internal and external? And I can measure that. Is it actually happening? You need to be able to measure that on your own. Look, we can make this idea of purpose really altruistic and all about touchy-feely, it feels good. Yes, people buy into it. Yes, people do feel good about it. But you can't miss as a leader the importance of purpose beyond profits, or purpose in addition to profits to drive more of that. People are motivated, quote unquote, inspired by purpose. So you don't have to keep motivating them with things that are temporary. Purpose is, in fact, practical. If you have any comments, if you have any thoughts on this, any clarification, send me a message, post a comment down below, shoot me a tweet, whatever you want to do. Just look up the name Steve Loas. You'll find a way to get a hold of me. I hope this is helpful to you to explain this idea of purpose. I've got a lot more coming your way in a couple of the upcoming episodes. See you next time.